Yeah. Oh, you didn't start recording. Well, yeah. Yeah, nobody said it.
They're not ready yet.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Yeah, I stay muted mostly because there's construction work going on. And I'm sure you don't want to listen to that noise.
We can't hear on the Zoom.
with 93, I left Oracle, and I watched with dismay. It really felt to me that my baby had become a serial killer. That's how it felt. What had happened, and was it my fault? But over the years, instead of having a nervous breakdown, I realized it was my responsibility from having been there at the beginning to understand what was going on. Why is this thing that we thought would help build relationships?
It's okay.
That would help build relationships, human relationships between businesses and customers, end up being so distorted in its usage and its impact. So some of you are part of the VRM community, and Tom Mahon wrote this in March 15th. And it just gives a sense of despair that we within the tech community have. And I want you to sort of sink into that despair, because that was a little bit of the despair that I had in the mid-90s. And we're 25 years later, that technology cannot solve our problems. The Frankenstein cannot fix just because it's powerful. We've got to understand, what is it we want it to do? Yeah, so I like this, and I shout out to Tom Mahon. In his humble opinion, we are trying to pack a multi-century transition from analog to digital, from natural to virtual and artificial, into 25 years for the benefit of the tech bros. Here we sit in Brotopia, and the project is blowing up in our face. And you are getting a lot of these signals, and I want to let you know, as somebody who's been working on this for over 50 years, possible pathways forward. Some of you may know that, who is this man? Douglas Engelbart, inventor of the computer mouse, father of human-computer interface. In 1968, he did the mother of all demos. Mother of all demos when he was head of the Augmentation Research Center, the ARC Lab at SRI. They were the second node of the internet. The other node was at UCLA. So I chaired Doug's core planning committee for 4 years, from 2000 to 2004. Why did I do that? I met him at a party. This is a story of my life. I met him at a party, and he said to the assembled crowds who were like you, it was 1999, and he said, you guys haven't even done 1% of what we had in mind at the mother of all demos. I was very intrigued, but I was also searching, where did we go wrong? What happened? Could I go all the way back to the tree trunk, to the roots, to understand what we could do? Going back to Tom Mann's statement, the transition from the analog to the digital. I was part of Oracle when we went through software revenue recognition. It was 1991, 1992. Software was completely new, and when Oracle shipped out the shrink wrap packets, we recognized 100% of the revenue. That took Oracle to the brink of bankruptcy. Couldn't meet payroll within 4 weeks because the cash didn't come in, because Ellison thought, oh, we've got revenue, never mind that people need technical support to install a relational database and to make it work for you and deliver benefits. So nobody was paying. They got all this software, and they didn't pay because they couldn't reach people at technical support. These are the kinds of things that when you're in the middle of it, you cannot see it all. My fellow accounting and finance, I was director of finance administration for the direct marketing division. My colleagues had nervous breakdowns. They were called in front of the SEC. What went wrong? And then out of this came software revenue recognition. So I was in that transition from analog to digital, and I know how it can crush people. And I swore to myself then, when I was in the my mid-30s, I need help. I don't know what's going on. This is terrible. I'm about to have a nervous breakdown. And I said, if I survive this, I will be the help that I was looking for. And I am that person now. Model T Ford in a field. If you actually Google this, you get a picture. And that's what I wanted to show, because Douglas Engelbart found a Model T Ford in a field. It was 1937, he was 12 years old. He was on the Oregon Trail, he lived there. Impoverished son of a single mother. He used to have to stuff newspapers in his boots in order to go to school when it was cold. He, you know, he's the guy who did the Mother of All Demos. What was he like at 12 years old? He was very lonely. And he found a Model T Ford. It was rusting in the field. And some auto mechanics in a nearby workshop reached out to him and said, okay, we'll help you. In 2 years, he repaired that Model T and he drove it. What that can do for somebody when they're young, to have the chance of other people caring enough about you, that changed his life. He is also the father of collective intelligence. He almost certainly had Asperger's. Nobody could understand what he was thinking or what he was doing, but he was capable of all that he did, which is the Mother of All Demos and all of this stuff. And none of it would have happened without those two auto mechanics taking an interest in him. So he devoted his life to the idea of networks of communities. He deeply believed that if computers were just used for personal computing, that we would get the Brotopia. He actually did. He felt, okay, you know, individuals wanted to be rich or powerful or whatever, could use the power of computing and elevate their own individual ideas. But civilization has always been the balancing out of different agendas so that we collectively could move forward. So he came up with the idea of network improvement communities. Now, NIC. So NIC is the fundamental plug that helped connect universities to each other at the beginning of the internet. It was called Network Information Center. If a university in Moscow wanted to be connected to the internet, they had to set up a NIC. So there was always this idea for him that a community can be linked to a global community with a NIC. And going beyond universities, going beyond the internet, what is the NIC of today that he had in mind? That 12-year-old boy who fixed the Model T Ford at 14 joined the Navy in World War II. And he was sailing out of San Francisco Bay when they announced that the war was over, World War II. And they all cheered and said, let's turn around, go back to Oakland so that we can celebrate. But no, this was the military, so they kept on sailing to the Philippines. And at Subic Bay, there was a Red Cross hut with a library that had the Atlantic Monthly that had this article, As We May Think. And when he read that, this person who had fixed the Model T Ford thought, oh, we could do this, because he was a radar technician, okay? He was seeing cathode ray tubes, he was seeing all of this stuff, and you're saying, why can't we use this to do the As We May Think, the memes? So, and he never let go of that idea, even though people said he was crazy. And what that led to, in 2009, Major General Doug Robb was at the Joint Chiefs. He was the chief medical officer for the United States. Remember now, in 2009, 9/11 was 8 years ago. And the US military had been shifting to net centric warfare as a response to 9/11. And I was brought in to think about the future of health in a networked world. And I was brought in specifically to bring in Engelbart's ideas of networked improvement communities, because the person who conceived of this project, Colonel Brian Masterson, had in fact come and studied under Doug at the Bootstrap Institute and could see that this was what was needed, and where he had pull and power was in the Air Force Surgeon General's office. The Air Force Surgeon General set this up, and we worked. I was there with them for 4 years. But what we ended up doing is taking some of Doug's ideas and kind of organizing it. So I'm not going to go too far into this, but it's all about feedback and participation. Because for Doug, community networks of communities meant that everybody should have a way to participate in the way that made sense for them, not the way that made sense for somebody else. So we, within the people-centered internet, one thing we say is not about us without us. And that, well, we've lost the plot on that thing right now. In development, in finance, in economics, in business. I watched this horrible thing on homeowners associations. We've lost the plot about not about us without us.
Farm system pyramid.
Yep. So the one I want you to say is, okay, we have to look at feedback more systematically, and that was what we came up with out of the Defense Health Futures. And yeah, I actually wore my same jacket, even though that was 10 years ago. I'm still
Sustainable.
Yeah, that's right. And the wealth of nations is the health of nations, a different thing, saying what is humanity, and how did we lose the plot on having people at the center of everything and think that we want artificial intelligence to replace everything. Well, that's very convenient for people who don't like to deal with people, but the rest of us, we're people. So what's the opportunity now? And this was a beautiful image done by Eileen Clegg, who some of you know, visual journalist. She's now doing a new startup called Tapestry, the visual tapestry. And this is what the Air Force people said, you know, out of turbulence comes lift. We don't have to fight the turbulence. We should see where it can take us. And we're leading amid chaos and change. And how do we actually move to a future that we want to see? And that future is already here in pockets. We don't have to say, we don't know where to go, we don't know what to do. We could say, okay, how can we spread that future that we want? So this is an article at the IMF by Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who's Senior Minister of Singapore. And his classmates and my classmates were this kind of same age, and I know him a little bit, but he's one of the best thinkers that I know of. And he talked about how do we confront a perfect long storm. This was published about a year ago. A perfect long storm of COVID, conflict, crisis, I think lots of C's, and how not to panic, because we actually, instead of saying, oh, whose fault is it? Let's say, how can we be responsible about the situation we're facing? So out of 10 years ago, the Defense Health Futures, the Federal Health Futures, in November this year, 10 years later, was announced the Federal Long-Term Plan for Equitable Recovery and Resilience. And that was because the US federal people had said, we better act, because the last time we didn't act, we got the Department of Homeland Security. Remember 9/11? Oh, we have a solution. Put 23 departments together, create Department of Homeland Security, the people who worked in the civil service knew that that was not the best solution, but it was the only solution you could do from a top-down basis. Or at least let's give them the benefit of the doubt that was the only solution. So they anticipated that that had happened in the past. And so post-COVID, because we all know that COVID exposed huge dysfunction, what could they do? So 45 federal agencies came together, inspired, in fact, by the work that we had done in Federal Health Futures, to say, how can we collectively respond to have a better government, to have better citizen engagement, to actually have participatory democracy? Thank you, Britt, for coming. So this is for you, really. We can do this, all people and places thriving, no exceptions. And this is a formal US federal program that I want to let you know about. What I have done, so while now Rear Admiral Paul Reed is leading the federal long-term, he and I work together at the Defense Health Futures. I am in Silicon Valley for 40 years, and I've been working on what can we do? How can we do place-based innovation and bring these pieces together, that we don't have to accept capitalist surveillance or state surveillance, but we can actually look at communities, networks of communities, and harness their power to actually have people thrive and flourish and the planet be stewarded. So what we're working on now is a new thing in Puerto Rico. We have the opportunity for a digital cross-sector regulatory sandbox in Puerto Rico. We've secured that from the Department of Commerce. That means that tech companies no longer have to stay in advertising. They can explore how can they contribute to health. And they have explored before, digital health, right? Google, Microsoft, Amazon, everybody's tried digital health. They couldn't pull it off. My thesis is because the regulatory constraints of 20th century regulations make it impossible to actually do the kinds of things which allow us to use digital footprints to see the impact of the integrated regulations that affect all of our lives. And finally, we have the chance to do it in Puerto Rico. So this is what people-centered internet is doing now. That we start in Puerto Rico, we expand to the regional sandbox in the Caribbean, then the Americas, both North and South, and we have proposed prosperity centers, sustainable prosperity centers. That's will be published this month as part of the Japan G7 policies. And last year, Germany's G7 presidency, people-centered internet wrote or co-led 11 of the 70 briefs given to Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany. I'll just give a little side note on that. It was being at the right place at the right time. And I want to present to you that perhaps we are at the right place at the right time. But what happened for me was that I am connected to the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Potsdam, Germany. And I was named a fellow of the Hasso-Plattner Institute. The first fellow was Angela Merkel. So it's a very prestigious, and I feel like big footsteps to step into. But because I was there, and Olaf Scholz's government was elected to power 1 week before they took on the G7 presidency. This is a new coalition after 15 years of Angela Merkel. And they were focused on domestic policy and how could they provide G7 leadership on international policy. So they punted. What they did to punt was that there was something called the Think 20 that had been supporting the G20 process and had been going for about 12 years. And Germany really liked the G20 process in 2017. And so they said, let's do a G7, Think 7. And so I was just there at the right place at the right time. I spent 3 months in Berlin, and you get to know people and you make friends. And so 11 of our papers, digital policies about the idea of data as a public utility. So we wrote 3 papers on that, one for global health, one for SME financing, the financing of small, medium enterprises, and the third was the use of digital utilities for scientific research. That had the honor that the German government is actually moving forward on implementing the SME financing one. And that's what we're also doing in Puerto Rico with the support of the Department of Commerce and as part of the federal long-term plan for equitable recovery and resilience. So we are at a point in time where if you want to act, there's things to act on. Thank you. I'm glad to have so many Germans here to.
So I'm going to put I'm going to stop this sharing. I'm going to put the gallery up. So I'll stop this share and put this gallery up.
Well, actually, Angie can monitor the questions that are on the Zoom.
On the Zoom chat too. Okay, well.
Why don't we just take questions from the room for now? Does anybody want to?
Questions or statements?
Yeah.
Adrian?
What is the top 2 or 3 technologies or standards in what you are building right now? Or
Community-led prioritization, participation, and feedback.
is there any kind of standardization?
We are working closely with NIST.
Coding something?
We're saying that the approach is to start with what communities want and their priorities. We've identified that the fishermen and the farmers in Puerto Rico have some really low-hanging fruit that we could work on to help get momentum, local momentum behind that. We aren't yet another group that's come in to solve all their problems with some magic bullet. And that it's very important to us that we don't say, it's identity, or payments or whatever, that we want to start with what is important to them.
So then would it be fair to say that you're like a federated learning operation where your organization is trying to learn from as many
Yes.
community-based initiatives,
That's
either
good.
technical or structural,
Right.
as possible, and then spread it to other
Yeah, for us here in Silicon Valley, we call that intelligent swarming. Well, at least that's one of the terms, where there's collective problem solving, where people who are connected to a problem come together to work out how to solve that. Cisco had to do that when they realized at the beginning of the internet that if they kept going at that growth rate, they'd have to have technical support. That was the population of California, so they came up with a different system of how customers could help solve each other's problems. And so there's pieces, but you were first.
When you started the talk, I'm reminded of like the 1 or 2 times I've been to Singapore and went to the National Museum and was really inspired by sort of the story of the, building out of the government. So I'm just curious if there's any more that you left unsaid about how the story of Singapore might apply to now, where you're like, there's actions that now might be the right place and the right time. Are there more lessons that we could learn, not from around Silicon Valley, but from places like Asia or Singapore that you would apply to? Do you think they're applicable to now or inspiring?
Thank you for asking that. More people should learn math. That's the lesson. 95% of all high schoolers in Singapore learn calculus. It's just a given. So it means that when the government is talking about, okay, the statistical distribution of all of these different policies is X, people can understand that and weigh it up and what the trade-offs. why are we not using probability in policy development in the United States? It's as though we could read and write with probability, but we refuse. You know, it's easy to blame other people for, oh, they do this, they do that, they do whatever. But come on, math. John.
So you and I are of an age, and that thing of, I remember in my neighborhood where I grew up in Canada, half the garages were full of kids and mainly boys, right? And their dads rebuilding their cars, because cars were something that you could rebuild. And not so many years later, I'm building computers in a basement, I think. So the organic growth of technology in the individual comes out of that tradition. But just a couple of comments and maybe a question. We keep talking about the transition from analog to digital. That linguistically, that says the digital is going to replace the analog. So I think transition is the wrong word. It's the addition or the augmentation.
Augmentation.
Right, that needs to be talked about. And the one I'd like you to comment on, I mean, you said the future is here in pockets. It's kind of a variation on the Spider Robinson that said the future is already here, it's just distributed unevenly. But when you have these distribution of pockets, what succeeds and grows out of the pocket is, really, you can't turn that off? Sorry, I've been in the same position. Is the sort of economic and cultural context. If there's, Google became an ad company because they were in a pocket where ads was the only way they could sort of grow the company. If there had been other ways to fertilize a pocket, they would have grown differently. So what is it that we're doing to make sure that those pockets of future that are existing now, the ones that we would like to endorse, how do we, and your efforts, how do we then select the winners, to use a much freighted phrase?
So there's a really nice article that came out when the CHIPS Act was announced. So there's the CHIPS Act, the Jobs Infrastructure Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. And together they represent the first green industrial policy for the United States. And the Democrats have been trying to do this. They couldn't get it done in Clinton. They couldn't get it done in the Obama days. But now the Biden administration has the first green industrial policy, $514 billion to be spent collectively on these three acts over the next 10 years. The article says, the Democrats are like the dog that caught the car. Now what? Okay. And what we are proposing in Puerto Rico, which is finding resonance across the federal government, is a participatory democracy approach to industrial policy. And we're doing that with the Census Bureau. Now, what they say about the Census Bureau, they have half the statisticians and economists in the federal government because they have to be very distributed. But they say they have 75% of the good ones. This means you've got mathematicians, you have thinking people working out how, mandated by the Constitution, how to harness data for the benefit of local communities. That's why this is such a big opportunity. We are working shoulder to shoulder with NIST and the Census Bureau to do the Puerto Rico Prosperity Initiative. There's something in the Census Bureau, which you can look up, called the Opportunity Project, TOP. I want to give a bit of the genesis of TOP. This woman who was at the Nike Foundation was very friendly with people who were Presidential Innovation Fellows, and they said, your idea about innovation, cooking up innovation between public and private, we should do that. And the Census Bureau picked it up. So from 2016 onwards, TOP has been operating, bringing public sector, private sector, civic sector, and pretty much anybody who wants to come in a way that completely bypasses government procurement rules. Because it isn't about procurement, it's purely about brainstorming what we want, what could happen, what could be a result. So they have focused top on Puerto Rico so that we can continue to do this experiment. And there's so much that's possible when you actually say, don't just look everything at the current level. We're in flatland now with the regulations of the 20th century. We've got to open our minds to what could be. When you open the digital dimension, augmenting our lives, let's open it not so a few people can dictate everything, but so that everybody can flourish. And that requires everybody being part of it. And the commitment for participatory democracy is difficult, but it's actually the only way.
I'm wondering two things. One of them, I'm fascinated by what's happening in Puerto Rico as a sandbox. It's a really fascinating thing. I've never heard of it, probably outside of labs, software labs previously. I'm wondering if Puerto Rico became a palette, a whiteboard for that. We met in 2017 after the hurricanes.
Yeah.
And so much was impacted there. I'm wondering if that made it an ideal place to begin to reconstruct with this thought framework upward. And alongside that comment, I'm wondering, this idea of a sandbox, which is a protected space of a sort, and all the very beautiful and intensive work that is being done there, I can only imagine. How are you all maintaining a space of comfort so that all of your intention and good work is, say, unaffected or outside of or air gap from the idea of external things coming in that aren't people thinking, that are AI thinking, machine learning thinking, chatbot things, how much of that is reaching out from the sandbox and bringing that in, or is that something you don't do? Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I thought you were going to go into politics because that's actually one of the reasons why it's difficult to do a sandbox. But going into the technology side of things, our participation and feedback is in fact using conversational AI, voice-enabled, in order that we are able to reach anyone who can speak, and to get their feedback along the way as things are rolled out or even things are designed. That is a commitment to that. And so it's a very different use of artificial intelligence to allow the feedback to be organized in such a way that we can make sense of it. So if you remember the 9-box model that we had, imagine if the AI actually puts the feedback into all of those boxes. Today, we don't. Right, the feedback goes into one giant slag heap. How do you put it into places where, it's like a software bug tracking system. There's a million things, but we'll get through them. Yeah.
How can we find out more about the Puerto Rico sandbox?
We're really at the beginning. So I'm hosting a salon for people here in the Valley next week. It is a people movement that we are beginning. We've done the work of getting international agencies like the ITU, the International Telecoms Union, the Department of Commerce, the State Department, the Department of Energy, the New York Federal Reserve. We've done all of these pieces to try and get the pieces together. But now it's actually up to us as people, how we move forward. I'll be sharing how the people-centered internet is working as a catalyst to bring the players together. There are existing things, for example, like the Health Equity Consortium, which for the first time has brought Amazon and Microsoft and 29 other companies together, and they're very interested in working with the federal long-term plan for equitable recovery and resilience, and we're catalyzing so that people can start to dance. We're really saying that let's start the music so people can get up and start to dance. And we won't be good dancers at the beginning, but some people will be, and then other people say, I'd like to learn that. So the model that we have, we discovered in the Federal Health Futures. The federally qualified health centers in the United States came out of a Peace Corps volunteers' idea that, wow, things in the United States are just as bad as they are in South Africa. Why don't we have health centers? Well, there's now 10,000 of them, and they were pivotal to getting the Affordable Care Act rolled out. There's a whole signature process for breakthrough collaboratives where health centers, no matter where they are, can work on topics of interest like diabetes or cardiovascular health and so on. And they solve problems through a signature process of 6 months, plan, do, study, act, come back, report, everybody listens, and then plans their next 6 months. This has been written up in a book, 2 editions of a book called The Practical Playbook, published out of Duke University. And little story, Duke University nearly lost its accreditation for its medical school, which is of course one of the top medical schools in the country, because they halved the number of ICU beds, intensive care units, beds that they needed, because they did this community-oriented approach to maintaining health. And when AAMA came to Duke and said, we're gonna take you won't be accredited anymore because you don't have the right number of ICU beds, Duke said, the family medicine chair, James Lloyd Witchner, said, we dare you, AAMC, to disaccredit us for doing what medicine should do, which is to keep people healthy. They won that, and he's put on the board of trustees for AAMC. We can make this change. We can make this change, but it is people who don't say we can't, who don't say whose fault is it, but okay, I can be responsible, and I'll quote Helen Keller, I'm only one, but I will do what I can do.
Cool. You have more?
I already asked a question.
No, go ahead.
I'm curious, like, what do people in Puerto Rico say they want out of this? Like, what, if not true, like, what is false right now that is still false in 3 years because initiative is vis-a-vis, like, place-based?
Yeah.
Something like, what exactly is the outcome we're looking for in the context of Puerto Rico? Context like my wife's cousins live in Puerto Rico, so I want to tell them what could happen. Like, what do you think makes sense in Puerto Rico? What are we hearing from people in there?
We are so much at the beginning, and it's so tempting to really say, okay, we're going to do this. But I want to tell the story about the fishermen and farmers. So people sent it, internet wrote the digital recovery plan for Puerto Rico for Hurricanes Maria and Irma. We pitched that they needed a digital recovery plan in 2018. We wrote it in 2018. Lo and behold, 5 years later, every country in the world, every town is writing a digital recovery plan. And we are saying that because we wrote it back then, we've been thinking about it longer than most. We also built the relationships within Puerto Rico. So there's a group of 10,000 volunteers wanting Puerto Rico to be an enterprising island. We partnered with them because they are now 10 years old. So we feel that we've got a network. We also are engaging at every level that we can, but the Department of Commerce Deputy Secretary Don Graves is Mr. Puerto Rico. He's the Economic Growth Coordinator for Puerto Rico, appointed by Biden. He was Mr. Detroit. He was appointed by Obama to do the Detroit turnaround. Why did the Obama administration and the Biden one, appoint Don Graves to be the turnaround guy on this. Because he's like a government startup guy. He really wants to change things. And he also sees that that there's so much public data. They say 375,000 public databases that they don't know how to offer the people to use to improve their lives. And so what we're doing is using Puerto Rico to do this. So there's a kind of a data play, there's a community and participation play, but for your cousins, the fishermen and the farmers, they met with Don Graves. There are clear dysfunctional things in how the federal government works with the territory and works with giving out funds after Maria. And just to give one stupid example, Puerto Rico's mailing addresses are from the Spanish colonial era, and they don't fit the US domestic. So when people were applying for grants after Hurricane Maria, because they had to provide latitude and longitude, they were disqualified from getting grants. I mean, there's just stupid stuff, right? I just had a conversation with my friend from USDA because we were talking about this. He said, this kind of thing happens all around, like so many small farmers in all across. If they don't own the land they farm, they don't qualify for USDA grants. There are things that are wrong. But what I'm saying is, let's use a software debugging system, track all of this stuff and pick them off, right? Stop saying that we've got to grandstand or make speeches. These are things that everybody knows is obvious that needs to be fixed. Let's just start fixing them. Thank you.
Vote for you for world president. So, Angie, is there anybody that's on the Zoom chat that had no, okay, all right.
No questions there.
Perfect. I think we're. Policy, yeah. So you can really see here.
Since Kimberly said about World President, the World Bank, the nominee for World Bank President is Ajay Singh, who was the CEO of MasterCard. And if you can catch his speeches about what he's saying that the World Bank could be doing, MasterCard is one of the digital leaders. And I think that the World Bank is going to transform a lot under him. Also, next year, 2024, is the Summit of the Future for the United Nations, where the Global Digital Compact will be signed. So this next year and a half is very, very important because Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, is the only electrical engineer who has ever become Secretary General. And we're not going to get somebody who understands technology like him again for a long time. He was Professor of Signals Processing in Portugal before he became Prime Minister, before he became UN High Commissioner for Refugees, before he became the Secretary General. So he's in his